Hello, everybody. This is your local idiot. I had a tiny little thought and I was thinking about sharing it with you. Sorry about that. Day 4. It's like 1 o'clock, so it's noon is the magic moment. So day 4. So on day 2, in the middle of the night, I took 2 glucose tabs, which is basically kind of a wafer of sugar, but it's basically made specifically for diabetics so that it'll break down really fast, rather, so it won't take forever to break down and go to your system when your blood sugar's low. Because I woke up in the middle of the night and I felt shaky. It's the exact feeling of when your blood sugar's really low. Um, so I woke up in the middle of the night and I had that feeling, and I took a couple of them and went back to sleep. Last night, um, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I don't sleep well typically, but I didn't have the exact same feeling, but I had something a little bit like it, and decided to test my blood, and I did. You're allowed, during fasting, your normal glucose range should be like 70 to 100, and if you test your blood. And when I woke up last night, it was like 74. Um, so I was close. But the other night it was like 66. So I guess it was legit. The next morning I tested it and it had already dropped back down. But now I'm good to go. Ever since then I've been good to go. Still just salt, the pink salt, and caffeine. But I go through these little moments, where it's 9 times out of 10 it's advertising, where you see some jackass company trying to get people that are susceptible to that kind of stuff to eat their products. Uh, Even if you eat the portions that they recommend, they're probably way too much. In fact, like the salt, sugar, fat thing, kind of a thing. But for people like me who are like addicted to that combo, um, it's just nutty. But I've been able to avoid it so far. Every time I get hungry, I try to drink water, which gives your stomach something to think about. And the other trick is, if within about 10-15 minutes, if you drink a bunch of water, and that's pretty much all you can stand to do, then the next trick is to take a pinch of salt, of that particular salt. I've heard table salt doesn't do a thing, but that particular salt seems to work. I don't know if it's got a lot of electrolytes or what, but and then that really does help. And I have actually even taken to, and I kind of discovered this, but coffee beans. So I don't typically grind coffee these days, but I have a really good coffee grinder, and I have some really good Guatemalan coffee whole bean stuff that I keep, and that I have some extras in the top of the coffee maker or coffee grinder. And so the other day I just pulled the top off and I grabbed a couple of beans and I just popped them in my mouth, just to, like candy almost, like not to eat, just to have the flavor in there. And so I kept those coffee beans in my mouth for like, I don't know, an hour. And this morning I did that again when I woke up. This is an early day for me for work. Like I say, they're it's a part-time thing, so every day is a little different. Today, I had to start work at 6, so I get up at 5. And so when I got up, and I was, prepping my wife's coffee and stuff like that, I put a couple coffee beans in my mouth, and I ended up, I was sitting there drinking my coffee, and fiddling around with them in my mouth, and one of them broke, and it had all kinds of flavor, and so I just ate them, and I was like, oh no, 2 coffee beans. It's like a half a bean each. And I'm like, oh no, does that wreck my fast? But I don't think I'm not going to call that as a break. I guess a breakfast. I'm not going to call that a fast break, a breakfast breakfast. I'm not going to call that. There's not enough caloric value in those to do that to you. So for 4 days, as of noon today, I've had 2 glucose wafers, which, I mean, if you look at them, they're probably about half a teaspoon each of sugar. And so a teaspoon maybe total of sugar in the middle of the night a couple nights ago. And 2 coffee beans. So apparently I've got twos going on for me. So 2 of those wafers and 2 coffee beans. So I just need to continue to resist. I'm not weak. Actually, I have more energy right now than I usually do, which is good because that's one of the things. I don't get good sleep, and because I have pretty bad sleep apnea, and I also have a deviated septum from getting my nose broken like 3 times. And I had sleep studies done, and they said I get no REM sleep. REM sleep is something that we all think. I mean, I thought that you couldn't live without. But according to 2 different sleep studies at 2 different places, actually in 2 different states that didn't even know about each other, they had the exact same determination that I never get REM sleep. So I live on Ambien and melatonin, and the rest of the time I'm a zombie unless I've got some caffeine in me. So right now, I haven't had any caffeine for a little while, so I'm a little zombie-ish, but I've got lots of energy. I just don't have a lot of alertness at this moment. But that's okay, because 9 times out of 10, I have way too much energy. I'm an ADD person. It's funny, I didn't find out I had ADD until I was an adult, and which is funny. I have a cousin that he and I are close in age, and grew up around each other, and he had ADD also, one of those Ritalin kids, and his parents put him on Ritalin. Like I said, he's never been quite right. But because he never had to learn how to cope, and my parents just suffered through it, and eventually I learned, for the most part, how to cope. And I have taken steps as an adult to medically medicate myself, not doing it I'm not my own pharmacist, like a lot of people do. But it was discovered in kind of about the same time that I had PTSD, and at the same time that I had ADHD. And for good measure, they even threw in, this is actually, no, I take it back. This is 10 years later. No, this is 20 years later. They threw in, this was at the University of Iowa Hospital, the neurology team there determined that I have dyscalculia, which means that I've always had a lifelong difficulty with math. And they said that there's a place in my brain where that I'm supposed to be able to understand and prioritize enough to memorize formulas, to like how to divide and stuff like that. And my brain has always resisted that stuff, really hardcore. I mean, really, what some people consider basic stuff, the concepts of algebra, and things like that. I even as an adult, struggle to memorize those things. I have to constantly remind myself of them. And many years ago, gave up on that and started using calculators for everything. And somebody who does project management for construction kind of stuff is kind of ridiculous. And not to mention, I studied electronics for a long time because of the military, and my father, who was an electronics master electrician, and use algebra quite a bit, when you're figuring out circuits along with all the components that are in circuits. Some things are designed to be a boost. Some things are designed to be resistance. Not just like resistors, but the wire itself, by the foot is a resistor. Certain components, like loads, like, a light bulb or whatever is a resistor. And so you've got to figure out, there's a whole bunch of letters in the math that way. And boy, I've never been good at that. Now I totally got the concept down of the only reason I know anything about algebra is because of electronics. Because my brain told me, okay, electronics makes sense and it's important to me. And so, I've always been able to do the math required to build a circuit. I can build very complex circuits, but the way I do it is very slow compared to the classic algebra formulas and stuff like that, and it's a pain in the butt. But so anyway, one day we were talking about it, and one of the things they asked me was, how was my math, and I said terrible, And then they started asking me questions, and kind of like a quiz almost, and they said, oh, you have dyscalculia. So, fuck. So literally when I say I'm your local idiot, I'm certified pretty much as some kind of idiot. But at least I'm not a Trump fan. Hey, I got that going for me. Really. Man, that would be the worst thing. Could you imagine you croak one day, and then I don't know I'm not a religious guy. I don't know what's next. I believe there is something. My favorite author, well, not my favorite author. My favorite subject of study, which is kind of funny, is Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce. He was alive during the late 1800s, early 1900s. And fantastic, interesting person. I've got every book that I've ever found that was written about him. And one thing he talked about quite a bit was that and he was very, very conflicted. He was brought up in a really hardcore Southern Christian religion. And he was always concerned that what he had been told was fact was conflicting with some things that he was seeing. And once you read about Edgar Cayce, you'll know what I'm talking about. So I know there's something out there, the word God is ridiculous. It's such a small word, and it's supposed to basically encompass such a large thing. And then people use a masculine, or even just any gender. Some people actually use she, but traditionally people use a masculine thing to he, God. So dumb. But I don't know what's next. But I know one thing, when I croak, and I believe there is something next, and I believe that when people die, they don't just vanish. I absolutely believe in reincarnation. That's something that Edgar Cayce talks about quite a bit. But I don't know how it works timing-wise and stuff. People talk about ghosts. And that's something that's talked about enough over time without having the big book, the good book, which is the most fantastic example of marketing strategies, is that book and the way the church has organized and stuff. Fantastic marketing strategy. It's a big-time moneymaker, and it's also a way that society, Western at least society, has organized itself and controlled, allowed a very few intelligent people to control the masses by tricking people into saying there's this invisible dude that's watching you and he needs your money, because apparently he's not he's omnipotent, but apparently he's not good with money, so he needs your money. At one time, that was an actual thing where the church would go out to the old folks and to widows and handicapped people or whatever, and help them out. Before there was such a thing as Social Security. And now the church lets people starve to death. They don't care about anything. They want to have jets for themselves personally, the big preachers, and fancy cars and mansions where that their dog has an air-conditioned dog house, that kind of stuff. and they're proud of it, which makes them evil, in my opinion. So I don't believe in their traditional God, that people talk about, Jehovah or whatever, the Jesus person that represented Jesus. If in modern times, if David Koresh, which was not his original name, but if David Koresh out of Texas that the FBI murdered had been the guy during 2,000 years ago, during Jesus's time, he probably would have been a Jesus character. We know better than to know that David Koresh was that way, because he was just a really good manipulator, and he really believed in his own shit. But he was also a bad person. There's just been so much written about it. So I mean, we don't know, and frankly, the church has had so much time to really shape the narrative on that. It's a really big marketing strategy, like a psyop, like a really successful psyop, like the ones that the Russians are currently conducting on America. So yeah, there's not one single religion that I believe in. I think that every single religion there is a story, is like a game of telephone, where that it's been added to over the years, and by one person and another person, the church got really organized with it and stuff, and they've got thousands of documents locked up, hidden away, and it's not really a big secret, because lots of people have talked about it, where that stuff is, and mostly what that stuff is. But nobody gets to just peel through that stuff unless you have special permission from the Pope, I guess. And the church has added and subtracted so many things over the years to support their own political narrative. Like at one time, priests were married and had kids, families, and all that kind of stuff. And then in the, I don't know, 1400s or something like that, somebody made a rule saying that priests can no longer, they have to be celibate, which, has worked perfectly. And what they've really done is they've created a perfect scenario to get a bunch of really weird, awkward people to apply to be priests in modern times, because they don't want to have be in a regular life situation. And so here, those guys are in the priesthood, and then there's no sex except for undercover sex, And so the people they're exposed to all the time are their fellow priests and young children. What could go wrong? And then the church compounded that problem by doing this whole huge cover-up thing, and then closing ranks around those people, and then moving them to the next parish, as if that's going to fix it. Because they're going to pray the pervert away, I guess. They're going to pray the psycho child molester, child rapist away. Nah, didn't work. Doesn't work. And in fact, a bishop in the U.S. recently, like this month, just got done paying out the highest payout of the Catholic Church's history. It's like 800 and something million to about 1,200 people that were raped by clergy, the Catholic Church's clergy. I mean, besides the whole, ridiculousness of like stealing Native Americans and original people from, in Canada, from their homes, and then made to go to these, special schools where they basically tore down their identity and did their very best to make them into Westerners, Caucasians, whatever the case may be. Those people were all horribly abused, and in many ways, not just sexually, but almost nobody on earth has been more cruel to those people than nuns. and priests as well. And it's just so well documented on many of those in the grounds of many of those schools. They found gigantic unmarked graves with, you know, many bodies of children that were at best case scenario deprived of things until they died. Just, health wise, they just couldn't handle that, or they were murdered. And there's lots of documentation about that as well. So yeah, I say fuck the church, but that has nothing to do with why I'm not religious. I'm not religious because I figured out that it's just a game, and I saw that stuff in the military with what they called psyops, where it's basically propaganda, and I was like, wow, and also interrogation. The techniques for interrogation and for psyops are identical for the indoctrination process of religious organizations to children and citizenry, to convince somebody to be religious. It's pretty hardcore. It's pretty invasive. Is not even remotely come close to describing what they do. So, but I was actually pretty damn religious. I've read the Bible. Once I got the NIV Bible as a kid, I read it cover to cover, 5 times. And what it made me do was see all the places where that it contradicts itself. And then I would ask my father, who is an incredibly intelligent man and also a true believer. I've only ever met probably 2 or 3 people that I consider true believers in my entire life. And when I say met, one of them is not a person I met. It's Billy Graham. My father was definitely one of them, though. And there's no shortage of posers. There's no shortage of people that are torn and stuff like that. But I used to have these theological discussions with my dad based on what I was reading. And I remember when I turned 12, he realized that I was forming my questions and basically the debate we would end up having well enough to where that it was a little frustrating to him and a little scary in that it was a little eye-opening to him as a person who was a true believer, that there are so many places in the Bible that just don't make sense. And the reason is it's like a kid that's cheating on homework and they're writing a paper that somebody else wrote or that like 10 other people wrote, and they're trying to splice it all together. If you read the whole thing together, each little paragraph or whatever makes sense because they're from something else. But when you read the whole thing together, it no longer makes sense. Well, the Bible's that way, and it's because they spliced together a whole bunch of books, and then took things out and respliced together, took things out and then respliced together. They did that enough times to where that it's just full of garbage, and it's they claim that it's a work directly from God, when in reality it's a work from human beings. Some of them smart, some of them not so smart. The whole thing about, the entire Jehovah's Witness religion is basically put together off of some really archaic Old Testament stuff, like don't take blood. I had a girlfriend for 3 years that was had grown up a devout Jehovah's Witness. She stopped going to church when she started dating me because I was a heathen, and but she had an amazing collection of books that the church requires people to have when you're a member of that church, and it was hundreds and hundreds of books, and each book was kind of small, almost like a children's, like Dr. Seuss type of book, with those small books. But each book was designed to describe or to break down and describe for the dummies. That literally is how it's pretty much put. It's sort of the Bible for dummies, basically, and it breaks down and describes to general laymen what this little passage means. And every single bit of it is full of absolute shit. And then I thought that their Bible was the King James Bible like everybody else's, and it turns out it's not. It's been rewritten. There's a lot of little things missing, and there's a lot of words added. Like I said, I had read the book, in my early teens 5 times, over and over and over again. And I used to have a really good memory. So before I dropped my computer a bunch of times, that one. And so yeah, it's all propaganda. So it's that whole religion, that whole doctrine, whatever you want to call it, is based around stuff like the Old Testament part where it says don't take blood. People were worshiping the golden calf, and they were sacrificing goats and shit like that. And some people got so carried away with it. Geez, where does that sound like today? Where that they were even drinking the blood of these sacrificed animals. And there's a section in the Bible in the Old Testament where it talks about don't eat pig, don't eat pork. And, Muslims still don't because of that section. The only reason that was ever put in any piece of the Bible was because of trichinosis. But at the time, nobody knew anything about microscopic organisms. And what was required, you could not drink the blood of a sacrificed pig or you would die. I've met people that had trichinosis and barely lived. And it's not a joke. And so America is almost rid of trichinosis to this day. But it's not been that long. Trichinosis is not a joke. It's been all the way into modern times, and all over the world, it's still a common thing. Just because pork has a parasite in it called trichinosis, and if it's not thoroughly cooked, you can't eat pork raw. It's not a sushi kind of thing. If you don't have it thoroughly cooked, you can die if you're unlucky. And but people were, drinking the blood of whatever, goats and stuff like that too. And, after a short period of time, the blood begins to spoil, which means that there's no longer antibodies or white blood cells that fight viruses and bacteria. And then it becomes a perfect breeding ground, blood, for, of a dead thing, for all kinds of bacteria, which is what breaks down bodies down. And that works because what happens to people when they die, right? The very first place that starts to happen is in the blood. And when people were drinking that blood, it was making them horrendously ill, if not die. So the Bible said, don't eat the unclean animal, which was pork, pig. Don't touch, like a pig skin. There are lots of weird sections that were literally about sanitation. But they didn't know it because they didn't know about microscopic organisms at that time. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff that was written by the elders at the time as a PSA to keep the public safe, and that stuff right there is surrounded by other things about like how, a man shouldn't lay with a man. There's no mention of women doing that. So apparently it's okay to be a lesbian, but being gay, well, you might think you're born gay, but you're going to hell. You're going straight to hell. The sad part is that just like in the original when it was written about that pork is unclean, it's from an unclean animal, which is then the depictions of Satan had a cloven hoof and all this kind of crap. Give me a break. That was trichinosis. And then the drinking of blood, don't take blood. Now, it didn't say don't take blood intravenously, because Jehovah's Witnesses till this day, they'd rather let their kid die. If their kid gets into a car accident, and if they don't get a blood transfusion, or they're dead, they'll let them die. I had lots and lots of discussions with my girlfriend at the time, and other people that were kind of from her circle who were a lot of them very, very intelligent, and but also raised in it, and so they were indoctrinated, so therefore it was correct. Kind of like Trump people. Somehow they believe, therefore this guy is not 100% fascist, even though he is. And so those mistakes were made because they didn't understand biology, yet, because several discoveries hadn't been made yet that were key to understanding biology. And again, we're faced with another one that apparently people still don't understand, which is, and I addressed this. Probably not on this, but I addressed it earlier on TikTok when I was talking to somebody that answered something that I said, and they were talking about, that and it's political. They were talking about how they really, really disagree with how people are talking about homosexuality in school, at kids. And I'm like, I've known lots of gay people over time, gay and lesbian. One of my nieces is, I think my only niece that I have, but my niece, no, that's not the only niece I have, but one of my nieces, who I've known ever since she was born, who is also incredibly intelligent. One of the most intelligent people I've ever met, and that's saying something because I've met some very smart people over time. Told her mom they've got a good relationship, and her mom's not an idiot. My sister told her mom that she was gay, and luckily my sister didn't do the classic Westerner thing and destroy her child's mind by telling her how bad she was, or disowning her, or all the other stupid shit. And her father and I, my brother-in-law, don't get along anymore. I think none of them understand why, except for, if they do, it's very private. They haven't told me why. But I have, my brother-in-law did something, and I reacted purposefully, and but my niece, and he's actually a really smart guy. He's a Russian, but he's a Russian American, but he's a really smart guy too in a lot of ways. And my niece is incredibly smart, and she determined right away as a kid that she wasn't interested in boys that way. She had lots of friends that were boys, but she was more of one of the guys. And this is, she knew this by the time she was about 10 or maybe earlier. This is the first I heard of it. And I've had lots of other friends that I've known over the years that were gay, and all of them say the same thing, that they knew it wasn't what they've been told to expect, the movies where the boy and girl and all this kind of stuff, and it just, but because they were having the same feelings, but about somebody from their own gender, or that they never ever felt like a member of that gender, the gender that they were told they were supposed to be. And this is all from being, somewhere around 9 or 10 years old to puberty. And I mean, I was interested in girls from the time that I was 4, okay? But I had tons of friends that were not remotely, girls had cooties to them until we were probably, 10, 11, 12. And then suddenly it woke up, I guess, when puberty hit. But people that are homosexual have the exact same awakening at the exact same times, in pretty much the exact same ways, but they realize or recognize that, one, something's wrong here. They're being told that they should feel and act this way, but they don't. They actually feel and act like that over there, like that group of people. And apparently it's not acceptable to feel that way or act that way. It's just bunk. That's biology. It's not just human beings. It's not just our society that's pushing some kind of narrative or whatever. There are many species. I mean, not even all land animals. I mean, I've read about how dolphins, in just about the same numbers, like statistical numbers, are homosexual, and it's biology. You're born that way. Period. All the evidence, every bit of the evidence points to that. There's only one kind of whatever you want to call it, because it's not evidence, because it's not scientific, that points away from that, and that's the Christian Bible and maybe Judaism, because the Christian Bible came from Judaism. But at some point somebody said a man can't lay with a man. But you know what that's about, though? That had nothing to do with biology. That had to do with family building. At one time, if a town wanted to be established, the first thing to do was somebody had to stake a claim to a piece of land and call it Jonesville or whatever, because his last name was B. Jones, I guess, or something. But then there had to be pumped out a bunch of kids. Otherwise, there would be no town. So go back 2,500 years or so, and families were the kind of the original group. Tribes were families. And a successful man was determined that he was successful by how many kids he fathered. But if you're gay, you're not fathering kids. If you're a dude and you're attracted to other dudes, ain't no kids coming out of that. And so that was considered a biological bad thing to some guy who's playing this numbers game about wanting to have a ton of grandkids. Or, everybody that wants to make kids happen had to say, oh man, it's bad not to be pumping kids out. So therefore, we got to put it in the magic book. That the invisible guy says, oh, guys can't lay with guys. They did kind of fuck up, though, because women didn't have a person. They weren't people back then, and so they didn't have any say. And so they didn't say women can't lay with women. They just said men can't lay with men. And then it was expected, obviously, that that I guess the men would rape the women that they wanted to, I guess, and whether they were gay or not, they'd be having kids. So. Just so you know, every single bit of the Bible, every single bit of that kind of stuff comes from a bunch of cousin fuckers, backwoodsy, no biology understanding, make up the rules as you go along. Science in I think it was 1600s, Western science, still believed that fire, it's published, it's in books, still believed that fire came from within wood, that actually fire was inside of wood, and they just had to let it out, rather than that it's a chemical reaction and whatever. One time a scientist found a tooth, and they were trying to figure out where it came from and what animal it used to belong to, and they made this, consulted a whole bunch of scientists very, very long time ago. And they did a drawing of this guy that this tooth, this molar had to come from. And it was a dude, and it was looked like kind of a Cro-Magnon looking, person. And later it was discovered it came from a pig, a prehistoric pig. So the idea is, like the scientific process, we notice something, and then we take a guess as to how this occurs or what makes this happen the way it happens. But then, unlike the scientific process, that's where it stops for religious stuff. There's nobody trying to prove anything. There's nobody saying, wait, when we find out new information, that might change. But until then, that's what we know. No. The Bible said that the earth was made 6,000 years ago, and so the answer to that from religion is that the bones that are in the ground were put there by the devil to fool us. Give me a break. It's funny why I use a southern accent. My dad had a southern accent, and people assumed all the time that he was stupid when in reality he was one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I'm sure that really frustrated him because he was extremely intelligent. On his test to get into the Navy, he missed one question. And, back then, that was a big deal. The tests are a lot more sophisticated now, but and this was he never told me that. It was somebody that knew him after his death that told me that. And there's a whole story that goes along with that. And that man was the man that told me was incredibly intelligent. But the Bible, and not just the Bible, the Christian Bible, but every religion that I've read about, which I've read most of the Quran, it would take you. It seems like it would take a lifetime to read the Quran, but I've read most of it, and I've read several books on Hinduism and things like that. Where that there's a lot of really some Eastern religions are less concerned about the politics of the competition for scarcity for resources because of scarcity or whatever, and they're more interested in the actual truth, and they come closer than any Judaism or Christianity comes to anything at all whatsoever. The only thing that Christianity ever got right was when they said Jesus, who was probably a very influential human being 2,000 years ago, if he was at all, because the church later changed his entire story to try to fit a script, and they fucked up because they ended up copying a very tired old script from about at least five or six religions that I know of that go back over 10,000 years, where that the Son of God, and died and was resurrected, all that stuff. That's been done over and over and over and over again. Ra, the sun god, he was the exact same thing. Stupid. But Jesus did say, be kind to each other. Treat each other like you would treat your own people, like you would have somebody treat yourself. If somebody needs something, help them. If somebody lashes out at you, forgive them. Those kinds of things, that's what you call true wisdom. I don't think it's religious anything, but it's true wisdom. And of course, the modern day Christians don't give a whip about that stuff. They don't, in fact, I don't know why they call themselves Christians. Because Christians are supposed to be called Christians because of Christ, who is Jesus. And so Christian would mean that you're copying what Jesus said to copy. You're living the way Jesus said to live because he was supposedly the Son of God, or sent down here by God to teach us or whatever. Except that modern day Christians would literally, if Jesus popped around again, modern day Christians would have him killed too. They would, before they did any of that, though, they would not pick him up if he was hitchhiking on the side of the road. They would not let him into their house if he knocked, or if they saw him on the side of the road walking along. If he was starving to death, they would not give him any food. If it was cold outside, they would not give him shelter. I mean, every single thing that Jesus ever said, which was all wisdom. My dad, it's funny, when my dad and I had these theological conversations, he would say at some point, just pay attention to the red letters. And that's what when Jesus spoke. I always thought that was funny, because he was almost just pretty much, realized that I was thinking it too much. And in Christian religion, you're not supposed to think about it too much, because the saying is, well, God works in mysterious ways, and you don't know the plan. God's plan is way too complex for you to understand it. And I'm like, well, why did they give us a book then? And then the book, how come it contradicts itself in so many places? And my dad, after point was, it was almost like two lawyers talking to each other and picking each other's things apart, except my dad wasn't defending himself. He was defending this very, very, very flawed book. So anyway, hey, I've literally talked your ear off again. This is what I do. 4 days. It's been 4 days. Can you tell? I don't know. I haven't lost any of my gab, I guess. Okay. Sorry about the long convo. If you're one of those, somebody made a comment about something I said a while back ago, and I sort of chewed his ass a little bit. Not because he said something bad to me, but because he said something stupid. And so, that he should have been able to, I mean, he literally didn't even read what I said. And so I basically pointed out that he was having a difficult time understanding what I had said, and that he should maybe reread it or just shut the fuck up, that kind of thing. So anyway, I don't want you to shut the fuck up, though. I would love for anybody to respond. I love having debates. I love having discussions, and it can be civil. Nobody has to have the same opinion as me. I mean, I could be wrong about every single thing I ever say. In fact, every year that I get older, I find out that I know less and less and less. So please, if you have something to contribute, please do so. I would love to learn more. As a person that believes in common sense science and stuff like this, I believe what I believe until I hear something that makes more sense because of something else that's been discovered. And so I'm always open-minded. I'm willing to change my mind on anything that I know if there's new and better evidence. So if you have an opinion, please give it to me, and I'm not going to chew your ass, and we can talk about it, and I'll try not to be an idiot as much as I can do that, because there's only so much you can do that way. All right. Well, have a great day. Maybe I'll post on day 4. Maybe I'll post in 20 minutes. I have no idea. See ya.